My name is Isaac Thornton. I am 70 years old, and just hours after I buried my wife of 45 years, my only son drove me to a deserted country road and left me for dead. He said, "This is where you get out, old man. The house, the business, everything is mine now." He drove away in a cloud of dust, never once looking in his rearview mirror. He thought he had taken everything from me, but he had no idea the papers he signed last week weren't for an inheritance. They were a confession, and he had just triggered the main clause. Before I tell you exactly what I did and how I took back every single thing my wife and I built from the ground up, let me know in the comments where you are listening to this story from. And please hit like and subscribe if you believe true legacy isn't about what you leave to your children, but what you leave inside them. The smell of funeral lilies was still thick in the car, a sweet, cloying scent that mixed with the expensive leather of the Mercedes my son Andre was so proud of. I sat in the passenger seat watching Atlanta's familiar skyline blur past the window, but I wasn't really seeing it. My mind was still at the cemetery, standing over the fresh earth that now covered my Deborah. 45 years. We had built a life, a family, and a successful construction company from nothing but grit and love. Now all that remained was the heavy silence in this car. Andre hadn't said a word since we left. His hands were clenched on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was wearing a $1,000 suit, but he didn't look like a man in mourning. He looked like a man who had just closed a hostile takeover. There were no tears for his mother, no comforting words for his father. I glanced over at him, searching for the boy I used to read stories to, the one who promised he would take care of me and his mom when he grew up. But that boy was gone. In his place was a stranger, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the road ahead as if I were nothing more than cargo he needed to unload. My first flicker of unease began when he exited the main highway, taking a smaller road I didn't recognize. The polished suburbs gave way to weathered, clapboard houses and sprawling empty fields. "Andre, where are we going?" I asked, my voice sounding frail even to my own ears. "This isn't the way home." He didn't answer right away. He just gave a short, sharp glance in my direction. "It's not your home anymore," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. He turned again, this time onto a red dirt road that kicked up a plume of dust behind us. He drove for another mile deeper into the heart of nowhere before finally pulling the car over. He killed the engine. The sudden absolute silence was deafening. "Get out," he said. His voice was flat, empty of all emotion. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words. "What did you say?" He turned to face me fully, and in the fading light of the afternoon, I saw the cold, hard glint in his eyes. It was an expression I had seen before on the face of his wife, Tiffany. "I said, this is where you get out," he repeated, enunciating each word. "Mom's gone. There's no reason for you to be there anymore. Tiffany and I need to start our life. The house, the company, it's ours now. You're old. It's time for you to rest." My voice was a choked whisper. "Rest here. Andre, this is the middle of nowhere. You're just going to leave me here?" A cruel smirk touched his lips. "You always taught me to be strong, Dad, to stand on my own 2 feet. Now it's your turn to practice what you preach." He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Are you getting out, or do I have to help you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He got out, walked around to the trunk, and pulled out an old canvas duffel bag with a few of my old work clothes inside. He tossed it into the dirt. "There. So you can't say I left you with nothing." The shock was so profound it felt like a physical blow, leaving me paralyzed. My son, my own flesh and blood. He opened my door and I stumbled out onto the uneven ground. He slammed it shut behind me, got back into the driver's seat and started the engine. I stood there watching through the glass as he put the car in drive. He never looked at me, not once. The car sped away, leaving me choking in a thick red cloud. As the dust began to settle, clearing my vision, the silence of the countryside rushed in. There was only the sound of the wind rustling through the tall Georgia pines. My hands were shaking. In that moment of utter despair, as the reality of my abandonment crashed down on me, a memory broke through the fog of my grief. It was from last week. Deborah lying in her hospital bed, her body frail but her eyes sharp and clear. She had gripped my hand, her strength surprising me. "Isaac," she had whispered, her voice raspy. "Listen to me. Don't trust him. He has Tiffany's eyes now. He's not our son anymore. Protect what we built. Promise me, Isaac. Promise me." I had nodded, tears streaming down my face, thinking it was the medicine talking the fear. I had promised just to soothe her. I promise, my love. I promise. That promise echoed in my mind now, not as a sad memory, but as a direct order. The initial wave of shock began to recede, replaced by something else. Something cold and hard. I looked around. I wasn't lost. In the distance, against the setting sun, I could see the silhouette of the old Shiloh water tower. I knew exactly where I was. George's farm was just 3 miles down this road. Andre had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was abandoning a helpless, grief-stricken old man. He didn't understand. The pain of losing Deborah combined with this ultimate betrayal didn't break me. It burned away everything soft, everything weak, leaving only a core of hardened steel. He thought he was taking everything. Instead, he had just given me the one thing I needed most: freedom. The freedom to act without worrying about hurting my family. Because that family in that cloud of dust had ceased to exist. I bent down, picked up the duffel bag, and slung it over my shoulder. He had started a war, but I was the one who was going to end it. I put one foot in front of the other. The dirt road was uneven, and the canvas bag, though not heavy, felt like a dead weight on my 70-year-old shoulder. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the Georgia sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. A sight Deborah would have loved. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. For a moment, all I wanted to do was lie down on the side of this road and let the world fade away, to be with her again. But then I saw my son's face in my mind, the cold smirk on his lips as he told me to get out, the way he tossed my belongings into the dirt as if they were trash. And just like that, the sorrow crystallized into something hard and sharp. Anger. It was a cold, clean anger that burned away the tears and cleared my head. It straightened my spine and gave strength to my legs. I was no longer just a grieving husband. I was a soldier on a mission. Every crunch of gravel under my worn-out work boots was a drumbeat. Left, right, left, right. I wasn't wandering aimlessly. I was marching toward the only man I knew I could trust, marching toward the beginning of the end for my son's arrogant little empire. Andre thought he had left me in the middle of nowhere, but he was wrong. He had dropped me right at the doorstep of my new beginning. The air grew cooler as twilight settled in, but I didn't feel the chill. The fire inside me was burning too hot. This wasn't a walk of shame or desperation. This was a pilgrimage. I was walking to honor a promise made to the woman who gave me everything, and I would not fail her. With every step, memories I had long buried began to surface sharp and clear as broken glass. I had been a fool, a blind, sentimental fool. Deborah had seen it. She had tried to warn me, not just on her deathbed, but in countless little ways over the years. I just hadn't wanted to listen. I remembered Andre's 30th birthday. I had given him a small percentage of shares in the company, a gesture of faith, a promise of the future. He didn't thank me. He just asked if the shares came with voting rights. At the time, I told myself it was ambition, that he was eager to learn the business. Now I see it for what it was: greed. Then there was Tiffany. When Andre brought her home for the first time, she had walked through the house we built with our own hands, the home where we raised our son, and the first thing she said was, "This place has good bones. It would look amazing once it's completely gutted and modernized." She said it with a bright, empty smile, as if she were paying us a compliment. Deborah had gone quiet after that. Later that night, she told me, "That woman doesn't see a home, Isaac. She sees an asset." I had defended them both. "He's our son, Debbie. He loves us. She's just young." I made excuses. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I wasn't. I was a coward. I was avoiding a truth that was too painful to face, that the son we had poured all our love and hopes into had become a stranger, a man who measured his life in square footage and dollar signs. The signs were all there. The way Andre was always pushing to sell off our smaller properties to fund risky high-end condo developments. The way Tiffany would joke about my old truck or Deborah's simple jewelry. Each memory was another stone on my back, another piece of evidence in a trial I had refused to attend. I wasn't just walking away from the man who had abandoned me. I was walking through the wreckage of my own willful blindness. But the past was gone. All I had was the road ahead and a promise to keep. The blindness was gone now. My eyes were wide open. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a deep blue twilight when I saw them. Twin beams of light cutting through the dusk, coming up the road behind me. I heard the familiar, comforting rattle of an old Ford engine, a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat. I stopped walking and turned as the old pickup truck slowed to a halt beside me. The passenger window rolled down with a weary squeak, and I saw the familiar, time-worn face of George Carter. We called him Pops. He had been the first man I ever hired and the best friend I ever had. He looked at me, his eyes full of a deep sadness and a quiet anger. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't seem surprised at all. "Evening, Isaac," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Figured you might be out this way. Get in." I opened the heavy door and climbed into the cab, the familiar scent of old tools and coffee filling my lungs. I sank into the worn fabric of the seat, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. As he put the truck in gear and we started moving, I finally found my voice. "How did you know George?" He kept his eyes on the road, his large hands steady on the wheel. "Deborah called me," he said simply. "Last week, from the hospital. She told me she had a bad feeling about what Andre might do after the funeral. She made me promise I'd come looking for you if you didn't call me by sundown." He shook his head slowly. "That woman was always 2 steps ahead of everybody else. Looks like she was right as always." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. Deborah's love was still protecting me even from beyond the grave. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a deep blue twilight when I saw them. Twin beams of light cutting through the dusk coming up the road behind me. I heard the familiar, comforting rattle of an old Ford engine, a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat. I stopped walking and turned as the old pickup truck slowed to a halt beside me. The passenger window rolled down with a weary squeak, and I saw the familiar, time-worn face of George Carter. We called him Pops. He had been the first man I ever hired and the best friend I ever had. He looked at me, his eyes full of a deep sadness and a quiet anger. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't seem surprised at all. "Evening, Isaac," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Figured you might be out this way. Get in." I opened the heavy door and climbed into the cab, the familiar scent of old tools and coffee filling my lungs. I sank into the worn fabric of the seat, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. As he put the truck in gear and we started moving, I finally found my voice. "How did you know George?" He kept his eyes on the road, his large hands steady on the wheel. "Deborah called me," he said simply. "Last week, from the hospital. She told me she had a bad feeling about what Andre might do after the funeral. She made me promise I'd come looking for you if you didn't call me by sundown." He shook his head slowly. "That woman was always 2 steps ahead of everybody else. Looks like she was right as always." And in that moment I knew I wasn't alone. Deborah's love was still protecting me even from beyond the grave. George's house was small and smelled of sawdust and strong coffee. It was a simple place, but it was warm and it was safe. He led me to the kitchen and pulled out a sturdy wooden chair at the table, the same table where he and I had planned the early days of the company over 30 years ago. He didn't fuss over me or bombard me with questions. He just poured me a mug of black coffee, hot and strong the way I've always liked it. The warmth of the mug seeped into my cold, trembling hands. For the first time since leaving the cemetery, I felt like I could finally breathe. I took a long sip of the coffee, letting the bitter heat chase away some of the chill that had settled deep in my bones. We sat there in comfortable silence, 2 old friends who didn't need words to understand the depth of the betrayal that had just occurred. In that quiet kitchen, surrounded by a lifetime of shared history and unspoken loyalty, I wasn't a homeless old man. I was Isaac Thornton, and I was home. I took another sip of the hot coffee, the steam warming my face. George sat across from me, his presence a silent, sturdy anchor. He didn't rush me, he just waited. Finally, I cleared my throat and began to speak, my voice low. "It wasn't what he did today, George. That was just the end of it. The real moment, the thing that broke everything, happened last Tuesday." I closed my eyes and I was right back there, in the sterile, quiet room of the hospice. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and Deborah's shallow breathing. She was asleep, her face so pale against the white pillow. She looked peaceful, but I knew she was in pain. I had just stepped out for a moment to speak with the doctor. When I came back, Andre was standing by the window looking out at the parking lot. Tiffany was standing near the foot of the bed, and she was on her phone. She wasn't whispering. She was talking in a bright, cheerful voice, the kind of voice you use to discuss brunch plans, not to stand vigil at a deathbed. "I'm telling you," she said into her phone, The whole back of the house has to be opened up. We can put in floor-to-ceiling glass doors. It will completely change the energy of the place." I froze in the doorway, hidden in the shadows of the hall. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Yes, a total gut job," she continued, gesturing with her free hand. "We'll get rid of all that dark, heavy wood paneling your father-in-law loves so much. I'm thinking Italian marble in the master bath and a completely new kitchen. As soon as this is, all over, we can have the contractors in here within a week." I looked at my son, Andre, standing by the window. He heard every word. He had to have heard it. But he didn't move. He didn't turn around. He didn't tell his wife to show some respect for his dying mother. He just kept staring out that window as if he were a million miles away. In that instant, something inside me died. The part of me that had held out hope for my son, the part that had made excuses for him for years, it just turned to ice. He wasn't just letting Tiffany disrespect his mother. He was her accomplice. They weren't waiting for Deborah to die. They were just waiting for her to get out of the way. I didn't say anything. I just backed away from the door, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, and walked back down the hall. That was the moment I knew. It was no longer about saving my relationship with my son. It was about saving my wife's legacy from him, to a payphone. I didn't call from my cell. I didn't want any record of it. I called the sharpest lawyer I knew of, a young, brilliant woman named Amina Okoro. I told her I needed to see her urgently, that it was a matter of the utmost importance regarding my estate and the future of my company. When I sat down in her office that afternoon, I didn't waste time. I laid it all out. I told her about Andre, about Tiffany, about what I had overheard. I told her I needed to protect Deborah's legacy, but I couldn't just write Andre out of the will. He would contest it, drag my wife's name through the mud for years, and drain the company's resources fighting it. No, I needed something cleaner, something permanent. Amina listened without saying a word, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she just nodded slowly. She told me about something called a springing trust and a rarely used corporate bylaw provision. We spent the next 3 hours crafting it. We called it the Faithless Clause. It was a poison pill buried deep within the original corporate charter of Thornton & Sons Construction, a company I had founded with Deborah as my equal partner. The clause stated that in the event of a founding partner's incapacitation or death, if the designated heir, Andre, committed an act of gross negligence or moral turpitude that harmed the company's reputation or the founder's well-being, full and irrevocable control of all company assets and personal properties tied to the business would be immediately transferred to a pre-established trust. The trigger was the key. It couldn't be subjective. It had to be a concrete, verifiable action. 2 days later, Amina had the documents ready. It was a thick stack of papers, mostly boring corporate updates and tax filings. But buried in the middle was the activation paperwork for the Faithless Clause and the legal formation of the Deborah Thornton Legacy Trust. I brought the papers to Andre at the hospital. I told him my mind was foggy with grief, that the lawyers said we needed to update some administrative files to make the transition smoother when the time came. I told him it would give him temporary authority to manage things so I could focus on his mother. He didn't even read them, George. He just glanced at the top page, saw the words "Power of Attorney," and signed every single page Tiffany pointed to. He thought he was seizing power. He thought he was outsmarting his grieving old father. But all he did was load the gun, cock the hammer, and hand it to me. All that was left was for him to pull the trigger. And today, when he left me on that road, that's exactly what he did. He didn't just abandon his father. He legally disinherited himself with his own signature. While I was taking my first steps toward justice, my son and his wife were celebrating their victory. The front door of the house I had built, the one with the oak tree Deborah and I planted as a sapling in the front yard, was wide open. A locksmith was just finishing installing a new shiny brass lock set. Andre stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the man work. Tiffany was already inside her heels, clicking loudly on the hardwood floors that I had laid and finished myself. She was holding a glass of champagne in one hand and a tape measure in the other. "It's done," the locksmith said, handing Andre a set of new keys. Andre paid the man in cash, a $100 bill pulled from a thick money clip, and dismissed him without a word. He walked inside, locking the door firmly behind him. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed through the house. It was a sound of finality, a declaration of ownership. He found Tiffany in the living room, holding the tape measure up against the fireplace mantel. This whole wall has to go, she announced, taking a sip of her champagne. We can create a much more open concept, and this old brick is so dated. Andre came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He kissed her neck. Whatever you want, my love, he murmured. It's all ours now. We can do whatever we want. She turned in his arms, her eyes shining with a greedy light. Finally, she breathed. I can't believe it's finally ours. I feel like I can breathe for the first time. No more of his gloomy presence, no more of your mother's old-fashioned taste. Andre's smile was smug. I told you it would be easy. He's an old man lost in his grief. He signed those papers without a second thought. He practically handed it all to us on a silver platter. Tiffany laughed, a high, sharp sound that didn't belong in that house. To us, she said, raising her glass, the new king and queen of the castle. They clinked their glasses together, the sound sharp and brittle in the quiet house. They were so confident, so sure of their victory. They had no idea they were just ghosts haunting a property that no longer belonged to them. They were celebrating in a tomb and they didn't even know it. Andre refilled their champagne glasses, a self-satisfied grin spreading across his face. Did you see his face when I told him to get out? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Complete and utter shock, like a lost puppy. For a man who built an empire, he really is clueless about how the world works now. Tiffany took a delicate sip from her flute. He's from a different era, darling, an era of handshakes and honor. He wouldn't know a legal loophole if it bit him. It's almost sad, really. She didn't sound sad at all. She sounded thrilled. What do you think he's doing right now? She mused, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. Probably sitting on a rock somewhere, feeling sorry for himself. He'll find his way to a shelter or a church eventually. Old people are resilient like that. Andre chuckled. He's George's problem now. I'm sure he'll go crying to his old buddy. Let them reminisce about the good old days while we enjoy the future. He gestured around the room. And this future is going to be spectacular. First thing Monday, I'm calling the brokers. We're liquidating the heavy machinery division. It's slow, low-margin work. The real money is in luxury real estate development, Tiffany. High rises, exclusive gated communities. That's the Thornton & Sons brand now. Thornton and daughter-in-law sounds better, she corrected him smoothly. I've already got a list of designers and architects I want to meet with. This house is just the beginning. It'll be our showpiece. I want it featured in Architectural Digest. And it will be, Andre promised. Everything you want. We've earned it. I've spent years under his thumb listening to his lectures about hard work and integrity while he let the company stagnate. He was too afraid to take the risks necessary to truly grow. He was content to be a big fish in a small pond. But I'm a shark, babe, and I'm ready to swim in the ocean. He pulled her closer. No more living in his shadow. No more waiting for him to decide we're ready. We are ready. We've been ready for years. It's our time now. They stood there in the middle of the living room, their champagne glasses held high, two conquerors surveying their new kingdom. They were so blinded by their own brilliance, so deafened by their own self-congratulation, that they never felt the ground shifting beneath their feet. They couldn't hear the quiet ticking of the bomb they had lit with their own hands. Later that evening, Andre sat at my old oak desk in the study, the one I had used for 40 years to build our company from the ground up. He had my laptop open, scrolling through luxury watch websites. Tiffany was lounging on the leather sofa, flipping through a design magazine and circling pictures of kitchens that cost more than a small house. A soft chime announced a new email. Andre glanced at it, his expression shifting from boredom to annoyance. What now? Tiffany asked without looking up. Another email from the lawyers, he sighed, leaning back in my chair as if it were a throne. Amina Okoro's office. The subject line says, mandatory meeting finalization of the Thornton estate transfer. We have to be there Thursday morning at 10. Tiffany lowered her magazine, a frown creasing her brow. Mandatory. How inconvenient. That's the same day I have the consultation with the landscape architect. Can't you just tell them to handle it? It's just paperwork. Andre scoffed. Apparently not. It says our presence is non-negotiable. It's just a formality, I'm sure. One last round of signing our names 100 times before we can officially wash our hands of it all. We'll go, we'll smile, we'll sign, and then we'll be completely done with the past. He clicked the email shut, dismissing it from the screen and from his mind. Don't worry, he said, turning his attention back to the watches. It won't take long. We'll be done in time for a celebratory lunch. They were so sure of themselves, so wrapped up in their victory that they couldn't see the summons for what it was. It wasn't an invitation to finalize an inheritance, it was an invitation to an execution, and they were walking into it willingly. The law offices of Amina Okoro were on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of polished glass and silent, expensive carpets. Andre and Tiffany walked in as if they owned the place 5 minutes late, with an air of bored importance. Tiffany was scrolling through her phone while Andre loosened the knot of his silk tie. They were ushered into a large conference room with a sweeping view of the Atlanta skyline. And then they stopped dead in their tracks. There, sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table, were two men, George Carter looking solid and calm in a simple, clean suit, and next to him me. I was wearing my old wedding suit, the one I had saved for special occasions. It was perfectly pressed. I wasn't the disheveled old man they had left on the side of the road. I was Isaac Thornton, founder and chairman of Thornton & Sons Construction. The smug confidence evaporated from Andre's face, replaced by a flash of disbelief, then anger. Tiffany's perfectly made-up face hardened, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. They looked at us as if we were ghosts who had crashed their private party. Before they could say a word, the door opened and Amina Okoro walked in. She was a vision of professional power in a sharp, dark pantsuit. She didn't smile. She simply nodded toward the two empty chairs across from us. "Mr. Thornton, Mrs. Thornton," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss." Amina Okoro sat at the head of the table and opened a thick, leather-bound folder. The soft click of the clasp was the only sound in the room. She looked directly at Andre, her gaze unwavering. "Let me begin by clarifying the purpose of this meeting," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You are here today under the assumption that we are finalizing a standard inheritance transfer based on the last will and testament of your mother, Deborah Thornton. That is incorrect. We are here to discuss the execution of a primary clause within the founding corporate charter of Thornton & Sons Construction." Andre shifted in his seat, a look of confusion mixing with his annoyance. "What are you talking about? My mother's will is perfectly clear. I am the sole heir." Tiffany placed a calming hand on his arm, but her own eyes were narrowed. Amina ignored his interruption. "Your mother's will is indeed valid, Mr. Thornton. However, it only governs the assets she personally owned at the time of her death. The company and all properties tied to it are governed by this." She slid the thick folder into the center of the table. "This is the original 1983 corporate charter. I'd like to draw your attention to Article 9, Section 4, a provision your father and mother insisted upon. It is titled the Faithless Clause." A nervous energy began to fill the room. Andre started to speak, but Amina held up a hand, silencing him. "The clause is quite specific." She continued, her tone as cold and hard as steel. "It states that in the event of the death or legal incapacitation of a founding partner, myself, or Mrs. Thornton, if the designated heir, in this case you, Mr. Andre Thornton, commits a verifiable act of what the charter defines as gross fiduciary negligence or profound personal dishonor against the surviving founder, then the entirety of the heir's stake in the company, along with all associated real estate and capital assets, is immediately and irrevocably forfeited. Upon forfeiture, these assets are automatically transferred into a pre-established blind trust." Andre burst out laughing, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is insane. A personal dishonor clause. That's not a real thing. That's absurd. You can't enforce something so vague." Amina's expression did not change. "Ordinarily, you would be correct, Mr. Thornton. The language is intentionally broad, which is why the clause required two very specific conditions to be met for activation. First, a recent signed reaffirmation of the clause by the heir acknowledging full understanding of its terms. And second, the aforementioned verifiable act." She slid a single sheet of paper out of the folder and pushed it across the polished table toward Andre. It was the last page of the thick stack of documents he had signed a week ago. "I believe you'll recognize your signature, Mr. Thornton, right there at the bottom of page 17 of the administrative update, directly beneath the text reaffirming Article 9, Section 4. The color drained from Andre's face as he stared at his own signature. He had signed it. He had signed his own death warrant. Amina Okoro leaned forward slightly. "And as for the verifiable act of profound personal dishonor," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "well, Mr. Thornton, That is why we have a witness. Amina Okoro's gaze was like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and unforgiving. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were devastating enough. Your signature on that document, Mr. Thornton, was the first condition. The second condition, the verifiable act, has been met and thoroughly documented. She pulled a slim file from the larger folder. Exhibit A, she said, placing a notarized single-page document on the table. This is a sworn affidavit from one of the hospice nurses who was attending to your mother, Mrs. Deborah Thornton, on the afternoon of Tuesday, October 21st. In it, she testifies that she overheard Mrs. Tiffany Thornton on a phone call standing at the foot of your mother's bed, loudly discussing plans for a total gut job renovation of the family home, including the installation of floor-to-ceiling glass doors and Italian marble. The nurse states she found the conversation so inappropriate that she documented it in her personal log. Tiffany let out a small, strangled gasp, her face turning a pale, chalky white. That's a lie. She's misrepresenting a private conversation. Amina simply raised an eyebrow. Is she? Then let's move on to Exhibit B. She produced another document, this one a printout of financial records. These are server logs from the Thornton & Sons corporate bank accounts time-stamped Wednesday morning, the day after you signed the administrative papers, Mr. Thornton. They show multiple failed attempts to initiate a wire transfer of $250,000 from the primary operating account to a new private account. An account, I might add, that was opened in your name just last month. Your father's signature is still required for any transfer over $50,000. It seems you were testing the limits of the authority you thought you had acquired. Andre stared at the paper, his jaw working silently. He looked trapped. That was just a preliminary step. To move funds for a new project, he stammered, his voice weak. A project your father had no knowledge of. Amina finished for him. She then turned her gaze to George, who had been sitting silent and stoic this whole time. And finally, Exhibit C. She slid a third affidavit across the table. This is a sworn statement from Mr. George Carter. In it, he testifies that, as per a request from the late Mrs. Thornton, he located Mr. Isaac Thornton last Saturday evening, walking alone on a rural road 6 miles outside of Shiloh. He testifies that Mr. Thornton had no phone, no wallet, and had been left there by his son Andre Thornton immediately following his wife's funeral. Amina leaned back in her chair. Her work was done. Abandonment of a vulnerable elder, Mr. Thornton. That, combined with your premature and unauthorized attempt to seize company funds and your wife's blatant disrespect for your dying mother, more than satisfies the Charter's definition of profound personal dishonor. The faithless clause has been legally and irrevocably triggered. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the grief at the funeral, thicker than the tension in the car. It was the sound of a world ending. Andre and Tiffany just stared, their faces frozen in a state of utter disbelief. It was as if Amina had spoken in a foreign language they couldn't comprehend. Finally, Andre shook his head, a small jerky movement. No, he whispered. No, that's not possible. You're bluffing. Amina Okoro did not react. She simply stated the fact, her voice devoid of any emotion, as if she were reading a weather report. It is not only possible, Mr. Thornton, it is done. As of 9 a.m. this past Sunday, approximately 48 hours after the clause was triggered by your actions, the transfer was automatically executed as per the legal framework you yourself authorized. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. Therefore, she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming even more precise, to be perfectly clear, 100% of the controlling shares of Thornton & Sons Construction, the residential property located at 14 Oakwood Avenue, including the house and all its contents and all associated capital holdings, vehicles, and financial accounts, have been legally and irrevocably transferred. Tiffany finally found her voice a high-strained sound. Transferred to who? To him! She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. Amina gave a slight shake of her head. No, Mrs. Thornton. Your father-in-law is not the beneficiary. As I stated, the assets were transferred into a trust. Andre slammed his hand on the table, his face a mask of fury and confusion. What trust? What are you talking about? Who controls this trust? Amina. Okoro looked at him, her expression unreadable. The Deborah Thornton Legacy Trust, she said, her voice calm and steady. And as per its charter, its sole beneficiary is a local nonprofit organization that builds affordable housing for underprivileged families. The room erupted. Andre shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face was blotchy and red, a mask of pure rage. "This is a joke, it's a trick," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You put her up to this. You're a senile old man. You're not competent to make these decisions. We'll fight this. We'll prove in court that you manipulated my mother." Tiffany, recovering from her initial shock, stood beside him, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers," she spat, her eyes darting between me and Amina. "We will sue you for everything you have. We'll sue this entire firm for malpractice. We'll drag this out for a decade if we have to. You will not get away with stealing our inheritance." They were like cornered animals, lashing out with threats and accusations, their composure completely shattered. All their careful planning, all their smug confidence had dissolved into pure raw panic. They were loud, they were threatening, and they were completely powerless. George and I remained silent. We didn't need to say a word. We just watched them unravel. Amina Okoro didn't even flinch. She simply waited for their outburst to subside, her hands resting calmly on the folder in front of her. When they finally paused to take a breath, she looked at them with an expression of mild pity. "You are, of course, free to pursue any legal action you see fit," she said, her voice still perfectly level. "However, you should know that the trust is ironclad, and there is one more detail you seem to be missing." Andre let out a bitter, mocking laugh. He was still standing, leaning on the table, a wild look in his eyes. "Oh, and what detail is that? That we have to let him keep his old fishing photos? That we have to pay for his nursing home?" "Don't worry, we won't. You've taken the company, what more could there possibly be?" He still didn't get it. He was like a man who had been shot but hadn't yet realized the wound was fatal. He thought the fight was about the assets. He didn't understand that the battle was already over and he had lost before he even knew he was fighting. Amina Okoro's expression was patient, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept to a particularly slow student. "It's a matter of fiduciary duty, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice even. "The Deborah Thornton Legacy Trust is now a legal entity with a very specific, legally binding mandate. That mandate, as outlined in the document your mother and father drafted years ago, is not to manage a construction company. The Trust's board members are philanthropists and financial managers, not contractors. Their legal obligation, their only obligation, is to maximize the financial value of the Trust's assets to best serve its sole beneficiary." Tiffany, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Her voice was thin, nervous. "Maximize its value. What does that mean exactly?" For the first time, a flicker of genuine, intelligent fear appeared in her eyes. She was beginning to see the shape of the trap they were in, even if Andre couldn't. "It means," Amina said, pausing for a fraction of a second to let the weight of her next words sink in, "that the board has no interest in, nor the legal standing to operate Thornton & Sons Construction. Their duty is to convert the physical assets of the company into liquid capital as efficiently and profitably as possible. Therefore, the Trust's board convened an emergency session this past Monday morning. After reviewing the company's valuation, they voted unanimously to execute their primary directive." Amina looked from Andre to Tiffany, ensuring she had their complete undivided attention. "They made the decision to liquidate the company." The word hung in the air. Liquidate. It was a word of finality, of destruction. Andre actually smiled, a broken, triumphant sneer. "So that's your endgame," he hissed at me. "You'd rather burn it all to the ground than let me have it. You destroyed your own life's work. Everything you and Mom built just out of spite. You've lost everything. You're a pathetic, bitter old man who has nothing left." This was the moment he had been waiting for, he thought. The confirmation that he had hurt me, that he had pushed me to self-destruct. He believed he had won a moral victory, forcing my hand to destroy my own creation. He was wrong. It was then, for the first time since the meeting began, that I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his rant like a razor. "Not everything, son." Andre stopped, confused. Amina Okoro provided the final, devastating clarification. "Your father is correct," she said. "The trust did not sell the assets piece by piece. That would have been inefficient. Instead, they sold the company as a whole. All of its assets, its equipment, its existing contracts, the brand name, and all associated goodwill. It was all sold in a single private transaction that was finalized yesterday afternoon." She paused, picking up one last sheet of paper. "It was sold for the symbolic price of $1 to a new private investor." Andre stared blankly, his mind struggling to process the information. A private investor, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. What investor would buy a construction company for $1? He was looking for a loophole, a trick, a path to fight back. He was looking for an enemy he could understand, a corporate rival or a vulture capitalist. He was not prepared for the truth. Amina Okoro gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in George's direction. The new owner wanted to be present for this meeting, she said simply. He felt it was important to witness the transition in person. Slowly, deliberately, George Carter reached into the inside pocket of his simple suit jacket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, and from it he took a single crisp $1 bill. He placed it gently in the center of the vast, polished table. The silence was deafening. Then he reached into his pocket again and produced a folded set of documents, placing them next to the dollar. It was the bill of sale, signed and notarized. Mr. Andre Thornton, Mrs. Tiffany Thornton, Amina said, her voice formally concluding the proceedings. Allow me to introduce you to the new chairman and sole proprietor of the company you once thought you would inherit. George finally looked directly at Andre, his expression not of triumph but of a deep, weary gravity. Hello, Andre, he said, his voice calm and steady. It seems things have changed. I'll be taking over operations on Monday morning. We can discuss your future employment then, if there is one. The finality of those words spoken by that man was the blow that shattered them completely. Andre stared at George, his mouth hanging open, his mind finally comprehending the full, devastating scale of his defeat. He had not just been outmaneuvered. He had been humiliated. He had lost his entire world to the one man he had always considered to be nothing more than his father's old loyal dog. The sight was too much for Tiffany. All her dreams of Italian marble and architectural magazines dissolved into nothing. The future she had so carefully and cruelly planned vanished in an instant. A strangled sob escaped her lips. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she crumpled to the floor in a dead faint, her expensive designer dress pooling around her on the $1,000 carpet. Andre didn't even seem to notice. He didn't rush to his wife's side. He didn't call for help. The fight had completely drained out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He sank back into his chair, his body limp, his face slack with shock. He stared at the $1 bill on the table, the symbol of everything he had lost. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own ghost. I felt no joy in that moment, no triumph, just a profound, aching sadness for the son I used to know, the boy who had been lost so long ago to greed and arrogance. Amina Okoro stood up, gathering her files. I believe our business here is concluded, she said quietly. Perhaps someone should call for medical assistance. George and I stood up to leave while Amina's assistant was quietly calling for a paramedic for Tiffany. As we walked toward the door, a desperate, broken voice called out from behind me. Dad, wait! I turned. It was Andre. He had stumbled out of the conference room, his face pale and tear-streaked, his expensive suit rumpled. The arrogant man who had left me on the side of a road was gone. In his place was a desperate, pleading child. He rushed forward and grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Dad, please, he begged, his voice cracking. You can't do this. Please, this is our family. Everything you and Mom built. You can't just give it all away to him. He gestured wildly back toward the room where George was now standing, watching us with a somber expression. I'm your son, your blood. I made a mistake. I was wrong. I was stupid. But you can't throw me away like this. We can fix it. Call it off. Tell the lawyer it was all a misunderstanding. We can work something out. Please, Dad, don't do this to your own son. He was crying now ugly, desperate sobs. But they were not tears of remorse for what he had done to me or for the disrespect he had shown his mother. They were tears of self-pity, the tears of a spoiled child who had finally had his favorite toy taken away. I didn't pull my arm away. I just stood there looking at the man my son had become, and I let him say his piece. I owed it to the memory of the little boy I once loved to listen to his final pathetic plea. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up to his tear-streaked face. For a moment I saw the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap, the teenager I taught how to drive, the young man I proudly stood beside at his college graduation. All those memories flashed through my mind, and the pain of what I had to do was immense. But it was a necessary pain. Gently, but with a firmness that left no room for argument, I removed his hand from my sleeve. "You are my son, Andre," I said, my voice quiet and heavy with a sorrow that felt ancient. "You are my only son, and that is why this is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. But you are wrong. I am not throwing you away. You threw yourself away." His face contorted in confusion. "What are you talking about? I made a mistake. I can fix it." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You don't understand. This isn't about the money. This isn't about the company or the house or the things you wanted. It was never about those things. This is about your mother." I took a breath, the memory still so sharp it felt like a knife wound. The son I raised, the boy that Deborah and I poured our lives into, that boy would have defended his mother's honor with his last breath. He would never, ever have stood silently in a room while his wife planned to tear down his mother's home over her dying body. My son would have roared like a lion. But you, Andre, you stood there and said nothing. In that moment, watching you by that hospital window, I realized the son I loved was already gone. I grieved for him then, and I will grieve for him for the rest of my life. The man standing before me now, begging for an inheritance, is a stranger to me. "You don't understand what you've done," he sobbed. "You destroyed our legacy." "No," I corrected him gently. "You have confused legacy with assets. The buildings, the trucks, the money in the bank. Those are just assets. They are the shell. Anyone can own them. But a legacy is different. A legacy is the soul. It's the 45 years of sacrifice your mother and I put in. It's the respect we earned from our employees, men like George, who you threw away like trash. It's the integrity of our name. That is the legacy, and it was a legacy you had no interest in preserving. You and your wife just wanted the shell so you could gut it and fill it with your own empty, expensive things. I didn't take anything from you today, Andre, because you cannot lose something you never truly valued. This wasn't an act of revenge. This was a promise I made to your mother, a promise to protect the soul of her life's work. And my promise to her is more sacred than my biological connection to the stranger you have become. I looked at him one last time, my heart aching with the ghosts of 1,000 happy memories. The father in me wanted to pull him close to tell him it would all be okay to fix what was broken. But the husband in me, the man who had made a sacred promise to his wife, knew that some things were too broken to ever be fixed. There was nothing more to say. I had spoken my truth. I had honored my promise. I turned my back on him, on the ruin he had made of our family, and I walked away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Each step felt heavy, as if I were walking away from a gravesite, and in a way I was. I was burying the hope I had carried for my son for over 40 years. George was waiting for me at the end of the long hallway by the elevators. He didn't say a word. He just put a large, comforting hand on my shoulder. We stood there for a moment, two old soldiers at the end of a long and terrible war. I could feel Andre's eyes on my back, but I did not turn. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and we stepped inside. As the polished steel doors slid shut, sealing me off from the man who was once my son, I knew it was truly over. I hadn't just won a battle for a company. I had closed the final chapter of a life that no longer existed. 6 months passed. The chill of that autumn day in the lawyer's office faded, replaced by the warmth of a Georgia spring. The world kept turning, but my world had been completely reborn. The company that had once been Thornton & Sons was now Carter & Thornton Legacy Builders. The old pretentious sign Andre had installed was gone. In its place was a simple, hand-painted sign that George and I had made ourselves. The change was more than just in the name. It was in the air. The frantic, anxious energy of Andre's relentless push for profit was gone. In its place was the steady, satisfying hum of real work of purpose. The yard was filled with the sound of saws, of hammers, of men laughing and calling out to each other. It sounded like it used to back in the early days when Deborah would bring us lunch in a wicker basket, and all we had was a dream and a single beat-up truck. I wasn't the chairman anymore, sitting in a big office reviewing spreadsheets. I was back where I belonged. Most days you could find me on site, a tool belt around my waist, my old work boots covered in sawdust. My hands, which had grown soft behind a desk, were calloused again, and it felt good. George was the heart of the operation, managing the commercial contracts that kept the lights on. But our purpose had changed. We were no longer just building structures of steel and glass. We were building something far more important. We were building futures. I was no longer an owner, but a mentor, a teacher, a guardian of a legacy. The company was smaller now, but it felt bigger than it ever had before. It had a soul again. It had my wife's soul. The profits from our commercial jobs, the ones that paid the bills, were now funneled directly into our new mission, the Legacy Builders Apprenticeship Program. We weren't just hiring experienced workers anymore. We were creating them. We went to community centers and churches in the toughest neighborhoods in Atlanta, the places Andre and Tiffany wouldn't even drive through. We found young men and women who had been forgotten kids who had dropped out of school, some who were already on the wrong side of the law. We found kids who were full of fire and potential, but had never been given a single chance to prove it. We offered them more than a job. We offered them a trade, a future. We taught them everything. How to frame a house, how to run electrical wiring, how to lay brick with precision and pride. I taught them the way my own father had taught me, with patience and respect. I showed them that the work of their hands had value, that creating something solid and real from a pile of lumber and a set of blueprints was a kind of magic. We paid them a fair wage while they learned, and we partnered with the local community college so they could earn certifications alongside their on-the-job training. It wasn't charity, it was an investment in the community that had given me and Deborah our start all those years ago. Andre had wanted to build exclusive condos that walled people out. We were now building affordable quality homes for the very nonprofit that owned our old company, creating communities that brought people in. It was hard work. Some of the kids had never held a hammer before. They made mistakes, but they learned. I watched a young man named Marcus, who had been arrested twice for petty theft before he was 18, discover he had a natural gift for intricate carpentry. I saw the look of pride on his face the first time he perfectly hung a door on a house that a single mother and her 2 kids would soon call home. That look on his face was worth more than any luxury condo Andre could ever have built. This was the legacy Deborah would have wanted. She always used to say that the strongest foundations aren't made of concrete but of community. She believed in giving people a hand up, not a handout. Every beam we raised, every wall we framed was a testament to her spirit. We weren't just building houses. We were rebuilding lives. We were proving that a company's worth isn't measured by its profit margin, but by the positive impact it leaves on the world. This was the true meaning of Thornton & Sons. Not the name on the sign, but the values we built into every single project. "Watch your level, son," I said, my voice low and steady. I was kneeling on the ground next to Jamal, a 17-year-old with more fire in his eyes than I had seen in years. He was carefully applying mortar to a brick, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Don't rush it. The house is only as strong as the straightest line." He nodded, not taking his eyes off his work. He gently tapped the brick into place with the handle of his trowel, then checked it with the level. A slow smile spread across his face as the bubble floated perfectly in the center. "Got it," he said, a quiet pride in his voice. I smiled back. "Good. Now do that 1,000 more times." As I watched him, my hands covered in the familiar grit of mortar suddenly felt like they were 30 years younger. The memory hit me with the force of a summer storm. It was me and Deborah on a patch of empty land with a pile of bricks and a dream. We were laying the foundation of our first home. I remember her laughing, a smudge of mortar on her cheek as she tried to lay a brick straight. "Like this, Isaac?" she had asked, her eyes sparkling with joy. I had put my hands over hers, guiding the trowel. "Just like that, my love," I had whispered. "We're not just building a house, Debbie, we're building our future one brick at a time." We were so young, so poor, and so full of hope. We didn't have any money, but we had each other, and we believed in the work of our own 2 hands. Jamal's voice pulled me back to the present. "Mr. Thornton, you okay?" I looked at him, and in his focused, determined face I saw a reflection of that same hope. "I'm more than okay, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm right where I'm supposed to be." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the construction site, the day's work came to an end. I watched as the young apprentices packed up their tools, their tired but satisfied chatter filling the air. They were good kids. They were learning. They were building something. I drove home not to the large, empty mansion that Tiffany had so coveted, but to a small, modest bungalow on the outskirts of town. It had a porch swing and a garden where I was trying to grow tomatoes just like Deborah used to. I sat on the swing, a cup of hot coffee in my hands, and watched the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a lonely quiet. It was a peaceful silence, the silence of a man who was at ease with himself and his world. I no longer had millions in the bank. I no longer had a company with my name on it. Andre and Tiffany had taken all of that. But as I sat there listening to the sound of crickets starting their evening song, I realized I was the richest man I had ever been. They had taken the assets, but they had left me the legacy. And in that quiet, humble place, I finally understood the difference. I was at peace. It's funny how things turn out. I'm sitting here on the porch of my little house watching the fireflies start their nightly dance. A year ago, I was a millionaire. I was the owner of a large, successful company. I had a big, beautiful house filled with expensive things. And I was one of the loneliest, most miserable men on earth. My son, the person I thought would carry on my life's work, saw me as nothing more than an obstacle, a relic to be discarded. He thought that by leaving me on that road, he was taking my world. He had no idea he was giving it back to me. He took the house, but he left me a home. He took the company, but he left me my purpose. He took the money, but he left me my soul. It's a strange thing to be grateful for a betrayal, but I am. That single cruel act forced me to see the truth I had been avoiding for years. It forced me to choose. And I chose my wife. I chose our memory. I chose the values we built our lives on, not the fortune we accumulated along the way. I don't know what happened to Andre and Tiffany. After that day in the lawyer's office, they vanished. I heard they moved out of state, that they're struggling. A part of me, the father, feels a pang of sadness for that. But the man I am today knows that their path is their own. They made their choices. They valued things over people. They valued greed over love. And they are now living in the empty house they built for themselves. My house is small, but it's full of peace. It's full of the quiet satisfaction of a day's hard work. It's full of Deborah's memory, a presence that is more comforting and real than any physical possession. They thought they were leaving an old man to die. Instead, they set me free. My son never understood the difference between assets and a legacy. He saw the trucks, the buildings, the bank accounts. He saw the tangible things, the assets, and he wanted them. He thought that by owning them, he would own our success. But he was wrong. Assets are just things. They can be bought, sold, or stolen. They have no memory, no soul. A legacy is something else entirely. A legacy is invisible. It's the reputation you build, the respect you earn, the lives you touch. It's the feeling you leave behind in people's hearts. Our legacy wasn't in the Thornton & Sons sign. It was in the way we treated our employees. It was in the quality of our work. It was in the promise we made to each other to build something that would last, something that had integrity. Andre and Tiffany wanted to inherit the assets, gut them, and sell them off. They wanted to erase the legacy and replace it with a brand. I couldn't let that happen. The apprenticeship program, these young kids learning a trade, building homes for families who need them, that is the legacy. It's taking the strength and success we built and passing it on, not as a pile of money, but as an opportunity, a chance for a new generation to build their own futures. That is a living legacy. It breathes, it grows. It's something that can't be bought or sold. It can only be earned. And it's a legacy I am proud to be a part of. It's the only inheritance that truly matters. So this is my story. It's not a story about revenge. It's a story about reclamation, reclaiming a purpose, reclaiming a promise, reclaiming a life. The road Andre left me on wasn't an ending. It was a crossroads. It forced me to choose which path to take, the path of bitterness and anger, or the path of grace and purpose. I chose purpose, and it has led me here to this porch, to this peace. As I look out now in the distance, I can see the lights of the new community center we're building. I can almost hear the sounds of the hammers that will start again tomorrow morning. It's the sound of a new beginning. My son tried to take my future. Instead, he gave me a new one, a better one. A future built not on the name Thornton & Sons, but on the enduring spirit of Isaac and Deborah. A future built one brick at a time with honesty, with integrity, and with love. And that is a legacy that no one can ever take away. This whole experience taught me a powerful lesson. For years, I thought my duty as a father was to provide a fortune for my son to inherit. I was wrong. The greatest inheritance we can leave our children is not our wealth, but our values. True strength isn't found in a bank account, but in the integrity of your word and the respect you earn through your actions. Sometimes protecting what you've built requires you to let go of the very people you built it for, especially when they seek to corrupt its soul. It is a painful, heartbreaking choice, but it is a necessary one. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of life loss and the true meaning of legacy.